9 rings for mortal men, 9 souls bound to shadow. The Nazgûl, Sauron's most terrible servants, were once great kings before their fall. Neither living nor dead, they hunt relentlessly across Middle-earth, sensing fear, spreading terror. Their black robes conceal forms that have long since faded from the world of light, while their screams paralyze the bravest warriors. Their presence alone can wither hope. Commanding fell beasts that darken the skies, they serve one master and seek one treasure, the ring that enslaved them. This is their tale, how the mightiest of men became the emptiest of wraiths, immortal yet hollow, powerful yet chained, undying until the moment their master's will was broken. In the beginning, they were men. Not lesser men, but lords of great stature, kings ruling over shadowed hills, mages steeped in old craft, warriors who carved their names into stone and legend. During the Second Age, when Sauron wore fair guise and spoke with honeyed tongue, these 9 reached forth their hands for that which was not theirs to possess, and he gave it freely. Those who used the 9 rings became mighty in their day, kings, sorcerers, and warriors of old. They obtained glory and great wealth, yet it turned to their undoing. Of the rings of power and the Third Age, the rings gleamed with unrivaled craftsmanship, each a poisoned chalice promising immortality, dominion, and mastery over the spirit realm. And for a time, the 9 wielded them as masters. But the gift was doom disguised. Year by year, the rings consumed them. Their bodies lingered, their names endured, but their wills began to fray. They saw the world grow thin around them. The voices of men grew dim, and the sun dimmer still. They passed into shadow, but did not die. They became wraiths, not bound to life, but chained to the singular will that commanded all rings. The one, the master ring that Sauron clutched in his dark hand. Slowly, inevitably, their minds were devoured by his hunger. Their names dissolved into shadow, their faces were lost to memory, their crowns crumbled to dust. Though the world remembers them only as the Nazgûl, the 9 were not born as one. Each had a name once, now lost, and a kingdom, a court, a voice. Their descent was not uniform, for their origins were scattered across the lands of Middle-earth and beyond. And though they were consumed by the same fire, each bore it differently. 3 were said to be lords among the Númenóreans, proud men of the West who had strayed from the light of their ancestors. Another, whispers claim, came from the distant East, a king of vast domains beyond the maps of Gondor, adorned in gold and cruelty. Others still were sorcerers who had steeped their souls in forbidden knowledge long before Sauron found them. Their rings suited them, shaped them, and ultimately unmade them. But as the centuries wore on, all distinctions blurred. Their tongues were forgotten, their banners rotted in barrows. Only the Witch King rose above the rest, crowned not by lineage but by will, by the depth of his servitude and the power given to him in return. The others obeyed, not out of loyalty nor fellowship, but out of the simple binding truth. The ring held them all, and through it, the Witch King ruled them, as Sauron ruled him. And when the shadow returned to Mordor, they rose with it. The 9 rode as one, cloaked in black, veiled from sight. They hunted not for land nor for gold, but for the ring that had enslaved them. They were no longer men. They were the Nazgûl, the Ringwraiths, the Black Riders, servants of the Lord of the Rings, immortal so long as his will endured. There was no returning from such a fate. Some whispered that they had once been noble, that they had loved wives, sired sons, ruled justly. But such tales were lost to dust. What remained were shadows, haunted by a hunger not their own. The greatest of them took a name, Witch King of Angmar. The others remained nameless, faceless, voiceless. Only the terrible scream of their coming announced their presence. And behind them, always was the unrelenting will of Sauron. They did not draw breath, they did not bleed, yet they were not truly dead. The Nine were shadows made flesh, beings whose wills had been devoured by the One Ring and whose spirits had become instruments of fear. Though they wore cloaks and mail, their forms beneath were unseen, their hands pale and spectral, and their faces empty hollows that the eye could not endure. Yet they were not without terrible power. They themselves do not see the world of light as we do, but those who wear the ring live in two worlds at once. They dwelled in two realms at once. To mortal eyes they appeared as darkness cloaked, but to those who perceived the unseen world, they shone with cold and terrible radiance. When Frodo placed the ring upon his finger, he beheld them as they truly were. Tall, pale kings crowned with ancient iron, their eyes burning with malice undimmed by centuries. They could not be slain by ordinary blades, for their bodies no longer belonged to the world of men. Their forms were twisted, existing between shadow and flesh, bound to a realm beyond mortal reach. The fear they carried was not born of mere reputation or cruelty alone. It was a deep, primal terror woven into the very fabric of their being. Wherever they passed, the air grew unnaturally cold, as if the warmth of life itself was drained away. Courage withered like dry leaves in a harsh autumn wind. Horses shied and reared, sensing a death that was not of this world, and even the bravest warriors faltered, their hands trembling and swords dropping low before the mere presence of the riders. And where they lingered, sickness followed, an invisible shadow that crept into lungs and bones, twisting flesh with fever and despair. Those caught in their wake suffered a wasting illness, haunted by nightmares that gnawed at the mind and left the body weak. The Black Breath was more than mere disease. It was a creeping death that devoured hope, turning the strong to withered husks and leaving many to perish in silent agony. No healer's hands could stay this shadow's corruption. Only the rarest of magics could push it back, and even then, merely for a time. Spirits of the dead fled before them, and even lesser wraiths, spectres born of broken oaths or cursed places, shrank from their approach. For in the hierarchy of the unseen, the Nine stood above all save their master. Wherever they moved, they disrupted the boundaries between worlds, their presence a wound in the fabric of Arda itself. They wielded blades forged in darkness, though they had no need of them. The Witch King's sword, thrust into Frodo's shoulder at Weathertop, carried a splinter of Mordor's malice, a fragment that twisted through flesh and spirit, seeking to draw him into the Shadow Realm. They rode black steeds in the early days, terrible beasts bred for endurance and silence. But when Sauron's power grew, so too did theirs. At the height of war, the Nazgûl took to the skies on monstrous winged creatures, fell beasts, vast and vulture-like, whose cries turned milk sour and whose shadows darkened the sun. On these, they became the dread of Gondor, striking from above where no army could reach them. And always they searched. The ring called to them. Though they could not see as men see, they were drawn to the scent of fear, to the tremor of will. They could sense the presence of the One, and wherever it passed, they pursued it with tireless hunger. They were more than Sauron's lieutenants. They were his will, his eyes, his iron breath upon the wind, and they could not be turned aside by pity or parley or pain. Only by power ancient and unbending could they be opposed. In the beginning, the Nazgûl rode upon black horses, great, fierce beasts bred in Mordor's dark stables. These were no ordinary steeds. Their eyes burned with hellfire, their breath came cold as winter's grave, and their hooves made no sound upon stone or soil. Through meadow and forest, over hill and heath, the riders swept like storm winds, swift and silent as death. These horses were bred for shadow, creatures of nightmare and dread, bred from the bloodlines of the wildest and most stubborn breeds of the East. They bore the Nazgûl with relentless endurance across the length and breadth of Middle-earth, carrying their riders through mist and moonlight, thunder and rain. Yet even these steeds were mortal. The swords of men and elves, the fires of burning villages, and the crushing weight of war took their toll. As the War of the Ring deepened, the black horses fell one by one beneath blade and flame, their cries fading into silence. The riders' hunt demanded more, speed beyond the reach of flesh, terror that could darken the very sky, and a presence that could strike fear into the hearts of even the stoutest warriors. So the Witch King summoned a darker power. From the black pits of Mordor rose monstrous winged creatures, fell beasts, vast and dreadful, with leathery wings like storms unfurled, heads crowned with twisted horns, and bodies scaled in hide as dark as shadow itself. Their eyes glowed with a baleful light, and their mouths spewed screams that tore through the night, shrieks of despair that chilled the marrow of any who heard. The flying monsters were indeed fearsome things, but not dragons or creatures of old. They were foul creatures bred by Sauron in the dark places of the world, known only to the Ringwraiths. These were no dragons of old, nor beasts of legend or song. They were abominations, cruelly bred by Sauron's foulest sorcery in the deepest, most secret places of Mordor. Known only to the Ringwraiths, these fell beasts embodied the terror of darkness given wing, a nightmare made flesh and flight. Upon these fell creatures the Nazgûl took to the air, becoming shadows that soared above the world's armies. No fortress was beyond their reach, no battlefield safe from their unblinking gaze. Their wings beat down like thunder, their cries sowing terror like a plague. They were hunters of the wind and nightmare, flying harbingers of doom whose presence turned the tide of battle through sheer dread. Yet even these creatures were servants, bound as tightly as the riders themselves, twisted reflections of the ruin they carried. They were terror given flesh, imprisoned in flight by the same dark magic that bound their riders to shadow. And when the Witch King fell, struck down at Pelennor Fields, so too did their dread begin to fade. The fell beasts shrieked and faltered, their dark wings beaten back by the light of hope and courage. Their cries grew faint on the wind, and the terror they inspired was broken. Of the 9, one stood above all others. His name is lost to memory, his face forgotten by time. But in the frozen north, he was known by a title whispered in trembling dread: the Witch King of Angmar. He was Sauron's most terrible servant, the chief of the Ringwraiths, and his coming heralded doom for all who stood against the shadow. It was he who came to the northern kingdom when the Dunedain of Arnor grew few and scattered. He built his fortress in the cold mountains of Carn Dûm and waged a patient, relentless war against the remnants of Númenor's northern line. For nearly 5 centuries, he systematically broke the north apart, piece by bitter piece, until Arthedain alone remained defiant. Beyond the shadow of Angmar, the Nazgûl carried out numerous dark campaigns in service to Sauron's will. From their dread fortress at Minas Morgul, they struck fear into Gondor's borderlands, leading raids and hunting those who aided the Ringbearer. Their influence stretched across wild lands and forgotten paths, where whispers of resistance were crushed beneath relentless dread. In every corner of Middle-earth, their coming heralded ruin and despair long before the final War of the Ring was waged. In the bitter winter of the year 1974 of the Third Age, he struck his final blow. Fornost fell beneath his banners. Arvedui, last king of Arthedain, fled into the merciless snows. The Witch King claimed his conquered throne, but not for long. For from the south came vengeance. Círdan's white ships bore the host of Gondor, and in the Battle of Fornost, the tide of darkness was stemmed. The Witch King confronted Glorfindel upon the field, a lord of the Eldar whose light he could not endure. In that fateful hour, the wraith was vanquished and fled, his form scattered like mist upon the wind and shadow. Far off yet is his doom, and not by the hand of man will he fall. Khan Dum fell silent. The cold fires of Angmar guttered in the darkness, and the iron crown that once ruled the north lay buried beneath ash and ruin. His shadow faded, but the darkness he had sown lingered still. He vanished into the east, but his story was far from ended. When Mordor stirred once more, the Witch King returned, crowned anew, not with gold, but with flame and shadow. He led the Nazgûl from Minas Morgul, the city of wraiths. It was he who shattered the gates of Osgiliath, and he who relentlessly pursued the Ring-bearer through the wilds. At the height of the War of the Ring, he stood before the gates of Minas Tirith. His voice struck like iron in the hearts of men. His cry shattered spears, and none could stand before him, save one. On the field of Pelennor, Theoden of Rohan fell beneath his terrible beast, and in that fateful hour, a woman stood alone against the Lord of the Nazgûl. Éowyn, shield maiden of the Mark, clothed as a warrior of Rohan, and beside her, Meriadoc of the Shire, small and unseen. Together, they broke the spell of immortal dread. The hobbit's ancient blade pierced sinew not of flesh, but of spirit. Éowyn's sword struck true. Thus was the prophecy of Glorfindel fulfilled. Not by the hand of man did the Witch King fall, but by a woman and a halfling in Gondor's hour of greatest need. The rest of the Nine still walked the earth, but their leader, their Shadow Lord, was no more. His form was broken, his will extinguished. His fall was not only a turning point in battle, but a grievous blow to Sauron himself. The Eight fled, their wings clipped and their cries fading upon the wind. Stripped of their chief's dark strength, they returned to mortal steeds, slower and more vulnerable, though no less relentless. They hunted still for the ring, circling like vultures drawn to a fading scent, but the terror they once commanded was diminished. They were bound to it, the one ring. It was the chain around their necks, the fire in their eyes, the voice in their minds. So long as it endured, so did they. When it was lost, they searched without rest. When it was found, they hunted without mercy. And when it was unmade, they died without hope. The Nazgûl were not slain as men are slain. They had no hearts to still, no breath to silence. Long since passed beyond the circles of the world, they clung to a half-life purchased with shadow and servitude. Yet even that mockery of existence was not truly their own. It was borrowed, and it was burning. At the foot of Mount Doom, while the hosts of the West held the Black Gate against impossible odds, the ring was cast into the fires from which it came, and the Nine were unmade. Their cries were heard even at the edge of the world, terrible, inhuman, shrieking as if the void itself rejected them. Mounted on fell beasts, they had circled the mountain like vultures, but in the moment the ring perished, they were consumed. Their spirits were stripped of form, their wills released, not into peace or pardon, but into nothingness. There was no resurrection, no memory, no grave to mark their passing. Thus ended the Nazgûl. They had been kings once, rulers of nations, mighty in will and pride. But in the end, they were slaves. Slaves so utterly devoured by their master that they could not outlast him. With Sauron's fall, their tether to Middle-earth was cut. Not even the deepest magic could hold them. They did not fade. They were extinguished. And so, the final silence fell. The world moved on. The Fourth Age began. But in forgotten corners, in ruined towers, in the pages of ancient books, the memory of the Nine lingers. Not as lords, nor as heroes, but as a warning. What is given by darkness always demands its due.